Hello everybody and welcome back to another deck guide, this time featuring the Punk engine and the new Odion archetype, Apophis, whatever you want to call it. So this one, as best as I know, I have not seen anyone try this deck before. This is my own baby, so you guys are the first people seeing it. Again, to the best of my knowledge, some YouTuber or professional has probably done this before and you're all going to yell at me in the comments. So why combine these two archetypes? So Punk is well known as a relatively low power end board archetype when played pure, but its advantage is that it has a ton of extension tools and can just really chew through the opponent's disruptions. The Odion stuff is the exact opposite. Odion ends on an incredibly strong end board, and while it finds starters super easily, it has very few, if any, actual extension tools. So the thought process here was that we can use one engine to buff up the weaknesses of the other engine, and in testing, this has actually worked really well. Because the Punk engine, like I said, chews through a bunch of stuff, ends on the same board it always ends on, even through a couple of disruptions, and its end board can actually then just rotate into the Odion stuff. That's why we're not playing the Odion starters like Man with a Mark and Anubis, because the Punk engine wants its normal summon most of the time. There are some times you can do a full Punk combo with just special summons, but most of the time you want your normal summon, and you don't need the Apophis starters. You can just get into the Apophis stuff through the Punk engine, and we're going to show you how in this video. So let's get started. If you don't know the Punk engine, we'll go over it briefly here. I have done at least one video with it before, and you guys are probably going to see it like once every couple of months, because I do think it's probably my favorite deck. And so Amin here, you can pay 600 life to add any one Punk monster to hand. He's a very simple starter. Our next card is Shirakusai. Shirakusai is a polymerization for Punk cards. It allows you to fuse into the one Punk fusion, which is a core part of the combo in this deck. Note that all the little level 3 Punks cost 600 life to do anything. That's not particularly relevant in this deck, but we do play a Psychic and Punisher who benefits from that. Then we've got one Wagon. Wagon lets us search the field spell, which is integral to this combo. Deer Note can act as an extender, revealing itself and another Punk card in hand, special summoning one, sending the other to the graveyard. But more importantly, when this card is sent from field to the graveyard, you can special summon a Punk from your graveyard. That is super important for the combo in this deck, and basically in any Punk deck. Then we've got 3 Foxy Tune. Foxy Tune can discard itself and another card from hand to special summon a Punk from the deck. Ogre Dance can discard itself to grab any Punk that is not level 8 to hand, which is basically just 3 more copies of Zayamin, but sometimes you'll use to grab Shirakusai. Best judgment, you'll learn that as you play it. Then we play the field spell. So the Punk field spell is actually super good in that you play it, and then every time you pay life to activate a Psychic's effect, you draw an extra card up to twice per turn. So it's an archetypal Pot of Greed. In this deck, we aren't using that terribly often unless we have the Odion package already in hand and we're just playing the Punk engine as if it was pure. Most of the time, Jam Extreme Session is destined for greater things in this deck, because we need it to trigger Ultimate Tzolk'in to summon AFD and just get into the Odion stuff. We play 3 Emergency Teleports because it's an absolutely disgusting starter and extender that special summons any level 3 or lower Psychic from your hand or deck. It is not once per turn, so it can grab Zayamin as a true starter, but if your Zayamin gets interrupted and you still have to get to Shirakusai somehow, you can use E-Telly to get there or the Foxy Tune to get there. That's why this deck can chew through disruptions, because if you have either of these cards in hand already, it doesn't matter if they interrupt your Zayamin. If they don't interrupt the Zayamin, they let you grab the Foxy Tune, and then they interrupt that, well, you still may very well just have the E-Telly or the Deer Note in hand. It's impossible for the opponent to know where they actually have to hit you to stop the engine, because there's so much redundancy to it. It's great. We play one Fengli the Soldier Palm. So this card, if you send it from deck to graveyard by monster effect specifically, it reborns itself. That's the only thing we care about, outside of it being a level 1 tuner. And it is a plant, which means you can send it off of Diabolantis the Menacing Mantis, and we'll talk about that more in the extra deck. We play one Merciless Scorpion of Circuit, which is searchable off of the field spell, and you can special summon it by banishing a level 10 monster from your deck while you have Temple of the Kings, which is cool because once you special summon it, you can then search the Temple of the Kings itself. So that kind of sounds like a weird pair of effects, until you look at our field spell, Treasures of the Kings. So Treasures of the Kings, when activated, lets you set an Apophis trap from deck, but this card also becomes Temple of the Kings while it's on the field. And then if you have 2 or more set cards on your field or a trap in your graveyard, you can add a monster that mentions Temple of the Kings from deck to hand. So you play Treasures, it lets you set an Apophis trap, we'll go over those in a second, and then as long as you have something else to set on the field, you can then search Merciless Scorpion. So Merciless Scorpion requires you to have a Temple of the Kings on the field already, which is why Treasures counts itself as Temple, and then lets you search actual Temple of the Kings. So we play one actual Temple of the Kings because this is a continuous spell that lets you activate a trap the turn it was set. That's a super powerful effect, especially in this deck. And as you may have noticed, you get to set a free trap off of Treasures of the Kings, then you can activate it using Temple of the Kings. So what are we using to actually activate? Well, that's going to be Apophis the Serpent. Apophis the Serpent allows you to special summon it as a normal monster and then set another Apophis trap from deck besides another copy of himself, and then that card that you set can be activated this turn. So the whole combo is play the field spell. Field spell lets you search Merciless Scorpion. Merciless Scorpion gets you Temple. Temple lets you activate the Apophis that you set off of Treasures, and then that lets you summon an Apophis the Swamp Deity, which can then also activate on that turn. Apophis the Swamp Deity is a gross card. So you can special summon this trap as a normal monster again, but this one, instead of being an extender, lets you negate the effects of face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of other continuous traps you control until end of turn. So note that Apophis the Serpent counts as a continuous trap. So if you go Apophis the Serpent, set an Apophis the Swamp Deity, activate Swamp Deity, it sees one other continuous trap just from that. The other really cool thing about Apophis the Swamp Deity is that the negate is part of its summoning. So it's not special summon this when this card enters the battlefield, negate. That would require 2 chains for the actual whole effect to activate. But Apophis negates as part of its summoning condition, which means that you can use this to negate spells and traps that have just been played on the field, because you just summon, immediately negate, which is so much more powerful than the alternative. And especially because it can negate multiple spells. If you notice, it's negate the effects of face-up cards up to the number of other continuous traps you control. So it does not count itself, but it would count another copy of Apophis, which is great, because we can search 2 copies of Apophis the Swamp Deity throughout our normal combo, giving us a total of, upwards of 4 or 5 negates off of just these 2 cards. So then we also play one Statue of Anguish pattern. It special summons itself as an effect monster this time, which is important for some extra deck plays. Some of our links, actually all of our links, require effect monsters, so you can use Anguish pattern for those, but you cannot use either of the Apophises because they consider themselves normal monsters. Keep that in mind. But Anguish pattern is more commonly used because it can't be targeted by opponent's card effects if you have another trap card that's a monster, which you always will in this deck. And if any card is special summoned from Spell and Trap Zone to Monster Zone while this card's already a monster, you can target and destroy one card on the field. That is not once per turn, hard or soft. So you activate this at the start of your opponent's turn, it's online, and then every time you activate an Apophis the Serpent or Swamp Deity, you get a free destruction as well. That's really good, not just for obvious reasons in this deck, but also because it lets you clear up your monster zones, which can sometimes get clogged over the course of an opponent's turn as you're summoning Apophises. So just keep in mind, You can destroy your own stuff off of this and then recycle it next turn with stuff in the extra deck, so you're not really losing resources, and it lets you just keep playing and summoning more disruptions. We play 1 Verdict of Anubis. Verdict of Anubis is a counter trap that whenever your opponent activates a spell or trap card while you control 3 or more other spells or traps, negate, destroy the card that they activated, and then if you also have Temple of the Kings, you can destroy all of their monsters and do a bunch of damage to them. So this card is the absolute definition of a blowout. It's not super searchable in this deck, and you could probably play 2, but honestly, it's not completely necessary for the game plan, despite how strong of a card it is, because we're going through a bunch of searchable disruptions already. I like to play 1 just to catch people off guard, because it will completely end a game if you can catch someone off guard with Verdict of Anubis. It is just that strong. I play 1 Terraforming, which could be a second copy of Treasures of the Kings, but it's not for a few reasons. 1, Terraforming is a lot cheaper. Treasures of the Kings is like $8, you can get Terraforming for a few cents. 2, it also lets you search Extreme Session, so it's a little bit more versatile, even though it does make you a little bit more vulnerable to Droll and Lockbird. Then I play 13 Non-Engine, which is a little bit low, but keep in mind that if we're going first, we put up such a ridiculous board state with such consistency that we almost always win going first, and the 13 are kind of just here to help us going second. There's not a whole lot to say about any of our non-engine choices outside of Nibiru. We want to play at least 2 Nibirus because you need something level 10 or higher to banish off of circuit in your deck. It doesn't have to be in hand or anything, but it has to be in deck. So we are just banishing our Nibiru. So we play 2 so that we never have 1 in hand and can't use circuit's effect. And it's not like having Nibirus in your deck is a bad thing. It's still a good non-engine piece. It just serves double duty in this deck. So on to the extra deck, and I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. So, Diabolantis the Menacing Mantis is the first thing we have to talk about. So, Menacing Mantis is a level 8 synchro, completely generic requirements, and when it's synchro summoned you can send insect or plant cards from deck to graveyard up to the number of non-tuners used. We only use 1 non-tuner, but that's okay because we only have to send 1 monster from deck to graveyard. That's always going to be Fengli, which then immediately just reborns itself from the graveyard as a level 1 tuner for us. Great. Diabolantis also has the effect that if you control this card, you can target an insect or plant and make it a tuner for this turn. We can use that effect on himself to make himself a level 8 tuner. That's super relevant because we need a level 8 tuner and a level 8 non-tuner to go into Ultimayat Tzolk'in. So Ultimayat Tzolk'in is not synchro summoned normally. You have to special summon it from extra deck by using 2 level 5 or higher monsters you control with the same level. 1 has to be a tuner, 1 has to be a non-tuner. So in this case, Diabolantis is our tuner, and then whatever we reborn off of Deer Note, be it a Foxy Tune, Ogre Dance, or Rising Carp from the extra deck that we will go through during our normal combo, that is going to be our non-tuner. We can slap those together, go into Ultimayat Tzolk'in. So, for all of the effort, Ultimayat Tzolk'in's a really cool card. Because once per turn when a spell or trap is set on your field, while he's on the field, he sees it and lets you special summon a level 7 or 8 Dragon Synchro from your extra deck for free. So we're almost always going to be summoning Ancient Fairy Dragon. So, keep with me here. Ultimayat Tzolk'in, then we set the Punk Jam Extreme Session we search as part of our combo. Tzolk'in lets us see that and special summon Ancient Fairy Dragon, and then Ancient Fairy Dragon can destroy cards in the field zone, give you 1,000 life points, and search another field spell to hand. So we set Extreme Session, summon Fairy Dragon, blow up Extreme Session, grab Treasures of the Kings. That lets us go into the Odion engine from there. Fairy Dragon also has a cool effect that's not part of the core combo, but can come in handy, where during your main phase you can just special summon a level 4 or lower monster from hand, which is super cool. And then once we've used Ancient Fairy Dragon, we can synchro with it and Fengli that we got earlier in the combo into Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon can negate and destroy a monster effect that was activated and gain attack equal to the destroyed monster's attack until end of turn. So, once we get to that point in the combo, we have a monster negate to protect the rest of the combo, which is super cool. He also is not once while on field like a Barone would be. He's just once per turn, so you can then use him as an extra disruption on the opponent's turn, even after using him for protection. It's great. The rest of our synchros are just options. They are not part of the core combo, so if you already have access to the Odion stuff, you can go into PUNK Dragon Drive with the Punk engine. This lets you search a level 3 Psychic monster from deck, add it to hand. That can either be our one-of copy of Ghost Ogre or another Punk card. And then it can also reborn itself if the opponent ever reacts with any card effect to a Punk monster's effect. So it's not really protection, it gives you extension if they try to do anything to your Punk guys. We play an FA Dawn Dragster, who is just a spell negate. Basically, once per turn, reduce his level, negate a spell. His attack is based on his level, so whenever you negate, his attack goes down a little bit. Doesn't really matter because he's just a spell trap negate, and we love that. Then we play one Virtual World QB Shenshen. This is just a level 9 synchro we can go into that banishes any card sent from field to graveyard. It's really good against graveyard-centric decks, but keep in mind it has to be sent from field, and a lot of decks don't do that. It's good against Fiendsmith because they're trying to send their Link monsters to the grave and recycle resources, but it wouldn't help against something like Tearlaments, which is sending its entire deck to the graveyard. That would banish nothing. We play a one-of Psychic and Punisher because this is the big boss monster payoff for Punk most of the time if you aren't going into the full combo. Pep is a level 11 synchro that while your life points are lower than the opponent's, this card is unaffected by any opponent's card effects. It can also pay 1,000 and banish a monster you control and a card your opponent controls, but basically it's just an unaffected tower. During the battle phase, it also gains attack equal to the difference between your life and your opponent's life. So it's just like huge unaffected tower that you can use to finish out the game. It also can just like one card beat Tenpai, which is really funny. For fusions, we play Rising Carp. This is the only Punk fusion and the only thing we can go into off of Shirakusai. It requires 2 Punk monsters, and then once this card's on field, you can tribute it to special summon any 2 Punk monsters that are not level 8. So the idea is, if you can get into it with Shirakusai and Zeamin, you can then tribute it to get to Wagon and Deer Note, and then that gives you a level 8 synchro as well as the field spell, and then you're off to the races at that point. So Rising Carp just kind of fixes your board into what you need the board to be. We play 2 Divine Serpent Apophyses, so Divine Serpent Apophis contact fuses, meaning you don't need a polymerization effect of any kind, off of 2 Apophis monsters. Which is great because we just use the 2 traps that we can special summon on our turn to go into him, and then he can just once per turn set Apophis traps from your graveyard to your back row. So you use Serpent to grab Swamp Deity special summons itself as well, go into Apophis, and then Apophis can just set both the Serpent and Swamp Deity back into your back row, so you've used no resources to actually get into him. He can also, if a trap card is activated, just destroy 1 card on the field once per turn. So we can either leave him on the field as the 1 destruction, or we can use him as material to go into a Link, or a rank 6, or we can use him to go into Shen, just like a super versatile card, because he is completely free. He is a disruption, but not the most powerful disruption. We don't care because he's a body that is 100% completely free to actually get into. Then we play an IP-SP package. IP can link summon on your opponent's turn during their main phase, which we're almost always going to go into SP Little Knight off of that, which allows us to banish a card, and then when your opponent activates a card, SP can banish a card off of each field until end phase. So that is 2 disruptions between this package. We don't go into it super often because it does require we leave some extra stuff on board. but IP can actually clean up our board a little bit, because one weakness this deck does have is we need a lot of space to summon our trap guys on the opponent's turn, and so we can't have a bunch of bodies clogging up our board. IP lets us turn 2 bodies into 1 during the opponent's turn, which just cleans up our board so we can keep using traps. We use a one of Silu Hat Rabbit, which when summoned can just set a continuous trap from deck that turns itself into a monster. This is how we access Statue of Anguish pattern. It just, sets statue for free. So we have it every game as long as we can get into Silu Hat, which is just a link 2 that requires effect monsters. It's not hard to get into at all. We then also play one of Evilzar Lars. Requires 2 level 6 monsters, which we have 3 options in this deck. That's going to be Divine Serpent Apophis, Apophis the Swamp Deity, and our Merciless Scorpion of Circuit. So Evilzar Lars, as long as it has materials, cannot be targeted with monster effects, which keeps it protected, and whenever the opponent activates a card, you can detach materials to negate 1 card on the field. So it has to target to negate, so it can't activate against like hand traps or any other effects in hand, but it can negate a spell card that's already on the field. So it's kind of weird with targeting, but keep that in mind. So the amount of materials you have to detach is dependent on what it has as materials. So in this deck that does matter. If you use Merciless Scorpion of Circuit, this counts as a fairy. That means that Lars has to detach both materials for its negate. But if both of the materials are reptiles, which Divine Serpent Apophis and Apophis the Swamp Deity are both reptiles, you can only detach 1 card for the negate, and it's not once per turn. So, if you can, you really want to make this off of Divine Serpent and Apophis the Swamp Deity, because that gives you 2 basically Omni negates on the opponent's turn. Whereas if you make it off of, say, a Divine Serpent and Circuit, you only get 1 Omni negate. It's a little bit funky, but keep in mind you want to make it with all reptiles if you can. And then I just want to talk a little bit about what I've got in the sideboard here. This is not an actual sideboard, don't play this as your sideboard. So the Odion package likes Gallant Granite and a Lord of the Heavenly Prison. We do not have an easy way to put 2 level 4 bodies on the field. That means we don't have an easy way to get into Gallant Granite, which means we don't have an easy way to search Lord of the Heavenly Prison. If you want to put this package in this deck, you can. It's not impossible to get to Lord of the Heavenly Prison. You may just draw it in your opening hand, but keep in mind that we don't have an easy way to do it like some Odion builds do. That said, it is a very powerful effect because Lord of the Heavenly Prison allows you to reveal itself in hand and make all of your set cards unable to be destroyed by card effects for the turn. Then if you activate a trap, you can set Summon in and set a different trap from deck. I've got here just a few good options if you want to play the Lord of the Heavenly Prison. So Dimensional Barrier lets you declare a monster type and your opponent cannot special summon that kind of monster for the entire turn. So if your opponent's playing, say, an Xyz deck, you turn off Xyz and they are sad because they just lost the game. Karma Cannon puts everything into face down position, and then if anything was not put face down, it gets sent to the graveyard by its controller. That gets around immunity effects like Psychic and Punishers, because it is the controller being forced to send it to the graveyard, not the person who activated the Karma Cannon. It's a really weird rules lawyer thing, but just know it outs towers. And then Different Dimension Ground is also a good option just because it's a 1-turn dimensional fissure effect where any monster sent to the graveyard gets banished instead this turn. So you can completely screw over graveyard decks with this. So on top of this and Shen, we have a pretty good time against graveyard decks if you're playing this package. But again, I don't have it in this version. Feel free to play a Granite and a Lord and any one of these traps or any other trap to set off of Lord if you want to. And so with that, that's going to be it for our profile. Let's go ahead and look at some of the combos this deck pulls off. Alright guys, so now I'm going to show you our Zeomin 1-card combo, technically 1.55 because we have a couple of conditions we have to fulfill. One, we have to have something to discard to Foxy Tune, that can be any card, does not matter. And then 2, we have to have something else to set to actually get into the Odion engine. So we're starting with 3, but the tactics and the called by can be anything to discard and anything to set. So let's get started. Of course, we normal summon Zeoman, activate Zeoman to search Foxy Tune, discard Foxy Tune, discarding another card from hand to special summon Shirakusai from deck, activate Shirakusai to fusion summon into Rising Carp, activate Rising Carp, tributing itself to grab a Wagon and Deer Note. Wagon gets us the field spell, and then we can synchro into Diabolantis the Menacing Mantis. We haven't used this field spell yet because we need it later. Diabolantis sends Fengli, which will reborn itself, and Deer Note brings back a level 8. Diabolantis makes itself a tuner, so we can go into Ultimate Zolkin, and then we set the field spell, which allows us to summon Ancient Fairy Dragon for free, blow up the field spell, and grab Treasures of the Kings. We can then synchro into Crystal Wing for protection for the rest of the combo, set 2 cards, and that lets us search Circuit off the field spell. Activate Circuit, banishing Nibiru from deck to special summon itself, go into Temple of the Kings, activate Temple of the Kings so we can activate Apophis to search Apophis, which we can then activate another Apophis, and then fusion summon into an Apophis. The Apophis brings back both of our Apophises from the graveyard, and we go into Silhouette Rabbit with a couple of extra materials and set Statue of Anguish pattern. Then on the opponent's turn, we can summon our Apophis, which lets us set another Apophis from deck, and then this is what we're going to call our end board here. So we can activate Statue of Anguish pattern so that whenever we activate one of our traps, it destroys a card on the field. We can then activate an Apophis to negate 2 cards, trigger destruction off of our fusion Apophis, destroy a back row off of Silhouette, and destroy something off Anguish pattern. So Anguish pattern is particularly good in a situation like this, where our board's already a little bit clogged, because it lets us blow up our Apophis the Serpent to get an extra space to activate another Apophis the Swamp Deity. So this is overall going to be 2 negates off the first Apophis, blow up our Apophis the Serpent, then 2 more negates off our Apophis the Swamp Deity, our second one, along with blowing up a back row and blowing up 2 cards with a monster negate. So that's, what, 3 destructions, 4 negates, 5 negates in total, which is just such a crazy board off of 1 card. Cool. Cool. Now we're going to go over a combo you can do if you have Treasures of the Kings as a starter, so this is just going to be the Odion line. That means we won't be going through Foxy Tune, so we don't need an extra card to discard, but you will still need something to set on the field to activate Treasures of the Kings. Here we go. So, Treasures of the Kings into Field Zone, lets us set Apophis the Serpent, then we can use our Called by the Grave to turn on the treasures to grab Circuit. Circuit, same thing, banishes Nibiru, summons itself, and lets us grab Temple of the Kings, which we can use to activate our Apophis the Serpent. Apophis the Serpent sets an Apophis the Swamp Deity, which can activate this turn, bring itself out, and then we can fuse into this Divine Serpent Apophis to set both, use the 2 extra materials to go into Silhouette Rabbit, and set the Statue of Anguish pattern. So this is just the Odion stuff. We don't end up with Crystal Wing on board, and we don't get to keep our Divine Serpent Apophis, but we do still end up with all this stuff. So Apophis the Serpent is going to special summon itself on the opponent's turn, set another Swamp Deity. We can immediately activate Statue of Anguish pattern on the opponent's turn, so that puts Anguish pattern and Apophis the Serpent on the field with 2 Swamp Deities in the back row. That means that the first Swamp Deity you activate is going to be 2 negates, a destruction, and Silhouette Rabbit has a back row destruction, so that's 4 interruptions on the first Apophis you summon. And then the second one is going to see the first Apophis and get an extra negate off of that, so that is going to be 3 negates and a destruction, which, you know, for how short that combo is and the fact that it only took 2 cards in hand and one of them can be anything to set, just being able to get like 7 disruptions off of that is so good. Especially if you start with the Punk engine and the opponent just blows all of their hand traps stopping the Punk engine and you just use Treasures of the Kings to go into this anyways. Like, they're kinda screwed at that point. Cool. Cool. And so we're back with closing thoughts on our Punk Odion deck. So as you guys have seen, this is a linear combo from any piece of the Punk engine into the whole Odion package, basically on its own. Unlike just normal summoning Man with the Mark into Disruption and then being sad with a normal Odion deck, this can actually play through disruptions quite well, depending on what you have in your hand. It does require you like discard an extra piece, and unlike a normal punk deck, you're not recouping your losses with Extreme Session because it has to be used for the Ultimate Tzolk'in play. But I feel like that's fine. Like losing an extra card in exchange for a lot more resiliency in an Odion deck is perfectly okay with me. In my opinion, that's not really a weakness. The biggest weakness in this deck, in my opinion, is the fact that we only have 13 pieces of non-engine. You could... It's tough to say anything you could cut. The only thing I would say is maybe one Ogre Dance, because Ogre Dance is just 3 extra copies of Zeomin. Maybe we can run 5 copies of Zeomin instead of 6. But even then, I'm kind of skeptical. I have to wonder, I haven't really played with it, but I think this might be a deck where you want to run like 44. That gives you less chance to actually draw the Soldier Palm and lets you put some extra just disruption in there. But we don't mind opening any of the rest of the engine. So if we open any part of the Odion stuff, like if we open a Treasures of the Kings and the Punk engine, then what we can do is we can start going through the Punk stuff, and the opponent will probably throw disruptions at that because they won't know exactly what kind of deck we're playing, and they might think it's like pure Punk and we're trying to go into Pep, which, you know, we can do. But they'll be trying to stop that, and then as soon as you are forced to stop the Punk stuff, if they actually manage to stop you, then you can just play Treasures of the Kings and go crazy on the Odion stuff, which is really, really cool. For that reason alone, I might be tempted to play a second Treasures of the Kings, so let's see. You could probably play something more like this, I guess, and it would be perfectly okay. Just like a 44-45 card build with an extra Odion starter. The trick there is that you're less likely to have Punk extenders in hand. You have enough starters in Punk that you'll probably be able to start your combo anyways, but then you can't use like extra Foxy Tunes and extra E-Tellies as extenders as readily if you're in a higher than 40 card build. Maybe that's worth it for the extra non-engine pieces. I'm not sure. I haven't played with this enough because the Odion stuff is pretty new. But outside of wanting to maybe play a little over 40 cards, the deck itself feels really good. So I made this because I was trying to think of a way to make Odion a little bit more resilient to disruptions. If you play a full Odion package, you normal summon Man with the Mark, it gets Ash Blossomed, and then you're probably just setting your back row and passing. Whereas this has a package that lets you just chew through those disruptions and end on the same board anyways, which I feel improves the deck a decent bit. I actually think, despite the fact that no one's really playing this, it might just be because no one's found it yet, because it does feel really, really good to me. We also have all of like the best Punk options. We've got Psychic and Punisher we can go into. We've got Shen Shen to shut down graveyard decks. You know, these are things that Punk is trying to do normally, and we just have them as options. So if for some reason we get locked out of the Odion stuff, well, I mean, Psychic and Punisher and Shen Shen sometimes gets the job done on its own. And so yeah, that's gonna be it for this deck guide, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to yell at me in the comments if you've seen someone do a build like this, combining these two engines already. I'm actually curious if this is just something no one's thought about before. Yeah, so I hope you liked it, and I hope you have a good day, okay? Cool. Bye.